Catch it. At your age, this may be your last chance, my sister shouted. The heavy bouquet hit me square in the chest before I heard her finish laughing. Thick rose stems bruised my sternum, and sharp thorns pressed through the white silk ribbon, digging deep into my palms as my fingers instinctively closed around them. Around me, 200 guests erupted into a collective roar that echoed off the high glass walls of the Willow Crest Vineyard ballroom. The air suddenly felt suffocating, thick with the smell of stale champagne, roasted meat from the catering tables, and expensive floral spray. I am 40 years old. I spend my days working as a pediatric occupational therapist, teaching children how to regulate their nervous systems when the loud, chaotic world feels utterly overwhelming. My name is Kara Whitmore. I am the reliable older sister, the woman people call to fix broken things, not the desperate punchline of a wedding reception joke. Yet here I stood, holding flowers I did not want. The laughter rippled through the room, stretching a few seconds too long. I looked up from the crushed white petals, expecting to see Sloane turning her back to the crowd to embrace her new husband. She was not doing that. She stood at the edge of the stage, leaning forward in her custom gown, staring right at me with a rigid, expectant smile. A sudden shift in the light caught my attention. It was a solid red recording dot. 2 massive professional cameras, the heavy shoulder-mounted kind meant for reality television, were completely ignoring the bride. They were positioned on opposite sides of the dance floor, and both lenses were pointed directly at my face. A man wearing a black headset stood near the closest stone pillar. He rotated his wrist in a tight circle, signaling his partner across the room to keep rolling. They were waiting for a meltdown. They wanted me to scream, to throw the flowers, to give them a reaction. My gaze swept past the glaring camera lights and landed on the dessert table near the back wall. Lily stood there, perfectly still. She is 9 years old. I have raised her for almost her entire life. She wore her pale pink junior bridesmaid dress, her hands nervously twisting the fabric of her skirt. The venue lights reflected off a metallic clip near her waist. A small black microphone was securely attached to her silk sash. My chest tightened, and this time it was not from the impact of the flowers. I had explicitly demanded, in writing, that absolutely no audio or video equipment be placed on her today. Sloane shifted her weight on the stage and turned her intense focus toward the dessert table. Lily flinched. Her elbow caught her water glass, sending it off the edge. It shattered against the marble floor with a sharp crack that pierced through the background music. This was not a petty joke about my age. This was a trap. Benjamin stood near the stage stairs. He was the groom, a civil engineer who lived by blueprints, predictable routines, and measurable facts. Right now, his posture was completely rigid. He clearly did not understand why his new wife had just weaponized a harmless wedding tradition. Before he could ask her, his phone buzzed inside his tailored tuxedo pocket. He pulled it out, frowning at the screen. I watched the ambient light catch the sharp angles of his face as he opened a document. Whatever he read took only seconds to process. But the physical change was absolute. The color drained entirely from his cheeks, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. He looked up from the glowing screen and stared across the room at Lily. Then, very slowly, he turned his head and stared at Sloane. My sister noticed the shift. The wide, triumphant smile on her face tightened into something frantic. She took a step toward him, her hands reaching out. But Benjamin took a very deliberate step backward. The ballroom fell into an awkward, expectant hush, waiting for me to break the silence. I adjusted my grip on the bruised rose stems. I did not drop them. I started walking. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I moved past the round dining tables. I ignored the rising whispers from the guests. I did not look at my mother, Marjorie, who sat in the front row, aggressively patting the empty chair next to her and mouthing for me to sit down. I walked straight to the stage, directly to the groom. Benjamin looked down at me, his eyes wide and hollow. He was not my ally. We had never shared a secret or planned a rebellion together. He was simply a man who had just received a piece of information that completely shattered his reality. I stopped in front of him and held out the crushed roses. Hold this for the bride, I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady, making sure it carried just enough for him to hear. She is going to need it. Benjamin took the flowers without speaking a single word. His hands were visibly shaking. Up on the stage, Sloane realized the cameras were capturing a completely different story than the one she had orchestrated. Her control was slipping. "Oh, Kara is just being dramatic," Sloane announced, her voice booming unnaturally loud through the venue speakers as she gripped her microphone. She let out a high, artificial laugh. "Come on, everyone. Let us keep the party going." Marjorie stood up abruptly from her chair, gesturing wildly with both hands for me to disappear into the crowd. Near the DJ booth, a production assistant rapidly signaled the audio team to prepare a video projection. I ignored my mother. I ignored the music abruptly starting back up. I only looked at Lily. The little girl reached down with trembling fingers and touched the unauthorized microphone clipped to her dress. Her eyes searched the crowded room until they found mine, wide and terrified. She did not know what was happening, but she knew she needed me. I turned my back on Benjamin and Sloane, walking fast toward the dessert table. A woman stepped perfectly into my path, completely blocking my route to Lily. She wore a black headset over one ear and held a sleek digital tablet against her chest. I recognized her face from the vendor coordination meetings. Naomi Park, the lead producer for True North Media. "Miss Whitmore," Naomi said. Her tone was strictly professional, carrying the practiced authority of someone used to directing crowds, but she spoke rapidly. "We are ready to roll the family reveal video, but legal needs your final sign-off right now before we broadcast." "Move out of my way," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on Lily behind her. "I am getting my niece." "We just need you to confirm the paperwork," Naomi continued, refusing to yield the space. "This is the climax of the reunion segment." "I did not consent to any segment," I told her, lowering my voice so the surrounding guests could not overhear, but making sure every word was distinct and sharp. "I explicitly refused all commercial recording rights regarding Lily. You do not have permission to film her, and you absolutely do not have permission to put a microphone on her." Naomi frowned, tilting her head as confusion broke her professional mask. "That is not right. We cleared this weeks ago. We have the release." "I never signed a release." "Yes, you did." Then Naomi turned the tablet toward me, and my name was already at the bottom. 3 months before the bouquet bruised my ribs, my life ran on a quiet, predictable rhythm. The townhouse smelled of dark roast coffee and toasted cinnamon bread every morning at 6. Standing at the kitchen counter, I packed Lily a lunch and slipped her sensory chew tools into the front pocket of her backpack. While the coffee brewed, I checked my bank application on my phone. A scheduled transfer of $200 had successfully moved into Lily's college fund. Then I opened my email. Sitting at the top of my inbox was a message from the board at Riverbend Children's Therapy Center, officially offering me the position of clinical program director. I stared at the glowing words. The salary increase was substantial, and the title validated over a decade of hard work. But I did not reply immediately. My thumb hovered over the screen, calculating my required hours against Lily's after-school schedule. My entire existence had been built around being the safety net my family refused to provide, and every career move required careful consideration of the child who depended on me. I set the phone down and picked up a faded yellow washcloth from the clean laundry pile. Even after hundreds of washes, the fabric seemed to hold a ghost of baby powder and exhaustion. 9 years ago, my sister stood in my cramped apartment holding a diaper bag. She told me she just needed me to watch her newborn for a few weeks while she sorted her business out. A few weeks turned into months. It turned into a canceled out-of-state job offer for me, replaced by studying for my certification exams at 2 a.m. while bouncing a colicky infant on my hip. I was not a saint, and I certainly did not smile through all of it. There were nights I cried into my pillow from pure fatigue. But I stayed. To keep that stability, I had to make it official. I walked into my home office and pulled a thick blue cardboard folder from the filing cabinet. Inside sat the permanent guardianship order, complete with the raised seal from the family court. I traced my finger over the heavy ink. Sloane retained biological visitation rights, but this paper meant she could not unilaterally uproot Lily, change her school, or authorize medical decisions. I was not an informal babysitter waiting for a real parent to return. I was the permanent guardian. I always kept the original safe and maintained a digitized backup on a secure drive, meticulously tracking every visit and every cancellation. The doorbell chimed, shattering the quiet morning. I opened the front door to find Sloane standing on my porch, holding a massive, brightly wrapped box that barely fit through the frame. Our mother, Marjorie, hovered right behind her, already wearing her practiced peacemaker's smile. My sister had not visited in 6 weeks. She had canceled 3 consecutive weekend plans due to brand emergencies. Now she marched into my living room, dropping the giant box on the rug. Before Lily could even finish running down the stairs, Sloane had her phone out, the camera already recording. "Look who it is," Sloane cooed, aiming the lens as Lily threw her arms around the oversized box. "Put the phone away," I said, stepping between the camera and the child. My sister lowered the device, her smile snapping into a thin line. "I am just capturing a memory, Kara. You do not have to control everything. Phones stay in pockets during visits," I reminded her, keeping my voice level. That was our agreement. Sloane rolled her eyes, slipping the device into her designer purse with exaggerated force. Lily barely noticed the tension, far too completely absorbed in tearing the wrapping paper off a motorized scooter we did not have the yard space to use. Seeing the sheer joy on the little girl's face twisted something painful in my chest. I could never simply lock the door and cut contact, because Lily still desperately loved the woman who showed up just often enough to break her heart. Marjorie settled onto my sofa, smoothing her pristine slacks. "Sloane has wonderful news," she announced, her tone dripping with forced cheerfulness. "This is going to heal our family." "I am getting married," Sloane said, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "And I want Lily to be a junior bridesmaid." I looked from my mother to my sister. An invitation like this meant fittings, rehearsals, and hours of unsupervised access. "Who will be managing her schedule on the wedding day?" I asked. "Where is she changing? And what are the rules regarding your production team filming the bridal party?" Sloane let out a loud, theatrical sigh. "Can you stop treating my wedding like a deposition? It is a family celebration. Send me the schedule, the supervision plan, and the media boundaries in an email," I replied, crossing my arms. "Then I will give you an answer." Marjorie shook her head, looking at me with profound disappointment. "You always make things so difficult, Kara." They stayed for exactly 45 minutes before Sloane claimed she had an urgent vendor meeting. Once the front door clicked shut behind them, the house felt entirely too quiet. I went to the kitchen to finish packing the backpack. Lily walked in quietly, leaving her new scooter abandoned on the living room rug. She sat on a wooden stool, kicking her feet against the lower rung. "Does the wedding make Aunt Sloane my mom for real?" The question knocked the breath out of my lungs. I walked over and sat on the stool next to hers, looking directly into her young, serious eyes. "A wedding is just a party, sweetie," I explained softly. "Love is proved by who makes your breakfast and who sits with you when you are scared. A fancy white dress does not change who takes care of you." Lily looked down at her hands, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. "Aunt Sloane says after the wedding I can call her Mom, where everyone can hear. Keeping my breathing steady required an active physical effort." "Did Aunt Sloane text you that?" The little girl nodded, pulling her phone from her pocket. Her small fingers tapped the glass before sliding the device across the wooden stool. The message read exactly what she had said, followed by a second text promising a surprise family moment. Forcing a 9-year-old to play detective or keep secrets felt like dropping heavy stones into her backpack. "Can I take a picture of this for my records?" I asked gently. She agreed without hesitation. Snapping the photo, I handed the device right back, making sure she knew she was not in trouble. Later that night, the pale blue light of my laptop screen illuminated the dark home office. A new encrypted folder took shape on my desktop. The title contained only the current year, deliberately avoiding any angry labels or wild speculation. It held a simple digital timeline logging dates, events, and documents. The scanner whirred quietly beside my desk, turning the permanent guardianship order, the visitation calendar, and the recent wedding invitation into secured files. Creating this archive felt like laying down bricks for a fortress. Waiting for my family to define reality was no longer an option. Work provided a necessary anchor the following afternoon. At Riverbend Children's Therapy Center, a heavily overstimulated toddler threw a solid wooden block directly at my head. Catching the toy midair, I calmly guided the boy to a weighted blanket and waited out his storm. My supervisor watched the entire exchange from the hallway. Afterward, she stepped inside the room and gently reminded me about the clinical program director position. The offer still stood, but they needed an answer soon. Earning that title proved my life extended far beyond my family's shadow. I thanked her, asked for the weekend to finalize my decision, and immediately began researching independent after-school care programs. Relying on Marjorie for childcare could never happen again. My mother called right as my shift ended. Her voice sounded bright, layered with that practiced warmth she deployed whenever she needed a favor. The wedding venue required a medical emergency authorization for all minors in the bridal party, and she offered to handle the paperwork to save me time. I asked her to send the official form directly to my email. The document arrived 20 minutes later. Scanning the text, I found the scope incredibly narrow. It only covered emergency medical decisions on the specific date of the wedding, containing absolutely nothing about media rights or commercial filming. Wanting to believe my mother was simply being helpful, I signed the bottom of the page and emailed the file back to her. A small knot immediately tightened in my stomach. Marjorie still kept a spare townhouse key for emergencies, and that small piece of metal suddenly felt like a massive vulnerability. 2 days later, my phone pinged with a cancellation message. Sloan claimed a massive brand emergency required her immediate attention, completely scrapping her planned afternoon at the park with Lily. I held the crying child on the living room rug, rocking her until the tears finally stopped. That same evening, I opened a social media application and found my sister's face filling the screen. She was filming herself in her pristine kitchen, wiping away a single, perfectly timed tear. Her caption detailed the agonizing pain of mothers who were cruelly kept away from their children by controlling family members. My jaw clenched tight enough to ache. Taking a screenshot of the video, I saved her cancellation email and dropped both files straight into the encrypted folder. The following Tuesday, an unfamiliar address appeared in my inbox. A wardrobe stylist had apparently copied the wrong contact for an upcoming fitting. The attached schedule listed 2 separate garments for Lily. The first was a standard junior bridesmaid dress. The second item caught my attention and refused to let go. Drafting a quick reply, I asked for immediate clarification. Moments later, the sender attempted to recall the message, but my system had already saved the original text. The screen glowed against my face in the quiet office. The subject line read, "Final look mother and daughter reveal." The phone rang before 9 the next morning. The screen displayed an unknown number, but I answered anyway, expecting a parent from the clinic calling about an appointment. Instead, the frantic voice of a wardrobe stylist filled my ear. She apologized profusely for sending the fitting schedule to the wrong address, insisting my sister had promised all the outfits were already approved by the family. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles ached. I asked her to confirm, in writing, that I had never authorized a final reveal look. The poor woman stuttered, nervously explaining that the production team handled all the image rights for the broadcast. True North Media. Hearing that specific corporate name in my quiet kitchen added a terrifying weight to my sister's wedding plans. 2 hours later, a standard bridal party contract arrived from the official event photographer. Reading through the fine print, I found a clause granting unlimited commercial use of all images. I printed the document, signed my name for private family photos only, and drew a thick black line straight through the commercial exploitation paragraph. Scanning the modified page, I emailed it back and immediately saved the time-stamped receipt to my encrypted folder. Proving I supported the marriage while refusing to sell a 9-year-old child was essential. Lily walked into the kitchen after school, dragging her backpack across the linoleum. She did not ask for a snack or tell me about her day. She simply pulled her phone from her pocket and placed it on the counter, pushing the device toward me. The screen displayed a new message thread. "Kara already said yes," the text read. "Do not ask again, or you will ruin the surprise." Seeing those words made my stomach turn. A grown woman was actively teaching a child that boundaries were obstacles, and secrecy was the price of love. "You do not owe anyone a secret," I told her, keeping my voice gentle as I handed the device back, "especially adults who make you feel afraid of asking questions." She let out a long breath, her small shoulders dropping, and she did not reply to the message. I made her a sandwich, silently grateful she trusted me enough to show me the trap they were building. The situation escalated the following afternoon. A voicemail sat on my phone from a production assistant, casually asking to confirm the call time for Sloane's daughter. Returning the call immediately, I informed the young man that Lily was not talent for any television program. He sounded completely bewildered, insisting his supervisors had signed paperwork on file before transferring my call to the lead producer. Naomi Park spoke with the polished, calm authority of someone perfectly used to managing reality television chaos. She explained the project was pitched as a beautiful family reunion segment. Sloane provided all the necessary consent documents, the producer said, her tone suggesting I was simply out of the loop and needed to catch up. "I am the permanent guardian," I replied, standing up from my desk. "I have never signed a commercial release. Furthermore, I am sending you formal written notice of no consent right now." A long pause stretched across the line. Naomi promised her legal department would investigate immediately, but she flatly refused to forward the production pitch deck due to strict confidentiality agreements. She sounded professional, just a woman doing her job, completely unaware she was building a massive entertainment set on top of a lie. Word of my phone call traveled fast. My mother called that evening, her voice sharp and trembling with manufactured outrage. Marjorie accused me of trying to sabotage the most important day of my sister's life, claiming Lily would resent me when she grew older. "We are not having these conversations on the phone anymore," I said, ignoring the familiar sting of her disapproval. "If you need to discuss the wedding, send an email." "You cannot just shut us out," she snapped, furious that her ability to twist words and deny conversations was being permanently stripped away. I ended the call. Documenting everything was no longer just a legal precaution. It was my absolute only defense against a family that viewed my basic boundaries as an act of war. Friday brought a heavy rainstorm that hammered against the living room windows. I sat on the sofa, scrolling through my inbox, when an email from an unfamiliar marketing address appeared. Someone at True North Media had carelessly included my address on a massive distribution list for their upcoming promotional material. Opening the attached document, I stared at a glossy digital presentation. The title stretched across the screen in elegant, dramatic font. "The Daughter I Was Kept From." My throat went completely dry. Scrolling past stylized photographs of Sloane, I found a detailed summary of the narrative they were actively trying to sell. The text described a heartbroken mother, forced away by cruel circumstances, finally reuniting with her stolen child on her wedding day. The pitch framed the child's guardian as bitter, controlling, and desperate to hold on to a life that was not hers. They had taken my 9 years of sleepless nights, canceled dreams, and quiet sacrifices, seamlessly twisting them into evidence of toxic obsession. I was not just a difficult relative in their story. I was the actual villain, the obstacle standing in the way of true love and maternal healing. And there it was, printed clearly in black and white on the second page of the corporate presentation. The woman keeping Sloane from her child was listed by name. Mine. The heavy blue folder landed on the mahogany desk with a dull thud. Eva opened the cardboard cover, her eyes scanning the official family court seals. My oldest friend had practiced family law for over a decade, and her office smelled faintly of dry paper and cold coffee. She pushed her reading glasses up the bridge of her nose, comparing the permanent guardianship order to the digital files on my tablet. "This order is completely valid," Eva said, tapping a manicured fingernail against the paper. "Sloane cannot legally bypass you, but we need to build a wall." The attorney outlined our immediate steps. I needed to send a formal written refusal of consent to every vendor involved, notify the elementary school to tighten their pickup protocols, and refuse to sign any new documents presented at the venue. She specifically warned me against trying to log into my sister's social media accounts to gather more evidence. "A judge will not terminate visitation based purely on a marketing pitch," Eva explained, leaning back in her leather chair. "If you believe you can keep Lily physically safe, Letting her attend the wedding as a standard junior bridesmaid is the smartest move. It proves you are not the controlling monster this television show claims you are. We spent the next hour cross-referencing the glossy True North media pitch against my detailed visitation spreadsheet. The story Sloane had sold portrayed her as a desperate mother locked out of her child's life. The raw data painted a completely different picture. Every time my sister canceled a visit, I had replied with an offer for an alternative date. Her responses were right there on the screen, full of excuses about wellness retreats, product launches, and luxury brand trips. The most damning evidence against my sister was not my testimony, but the countless opportunities she had freely rejected. That evening, the townhouse was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Lily sat cross-legged on the living room rug, carefully arranging her colored pencils by shade. Sitting down beside her, I kept my voice light and conversational. I explained that weddings sometimes involved surprise video recordings, and adults occasionally forgot to ask permission before turning on a camera. "You have the right to say no," I told her, making sure my tone stayed calm. "If anyone makes you uncomfortable, or if they try to pull you away from the other bridesmaids, we have a plan." The little girl looked up, her hands pausing over a bright green pencil. "If you want to leave," I continued, "you just say, 'We forgot the library book.' You do not have to explain anything to anyone. You just hold my hand, and we will walk right out the door." Lily nodded slowly, repeating the phrase under her breath. Knowing she had an escape route seemed to loosen the tight posture she had carried all week. I had already arranged for a trusted neighbor to wait at a coffee shop near the venue, ready to drive Lily straight home the moment we needed to exit. Securing that safety net gave me the clarity to secure my own future. The next morning, I finalized arrangements with an independent after-school program. Relying on family for childcare was officially a thing of the past. Walking into my supervisor's office at Riverbend, I asked to delay formally signing the clinical program director acceptance letter until Monday morning, right after the wedding weekend. "Take the time you need, Kara," my boss said, offering a warm smile. "This promotion is not a favor. You earned it by being the most capable person in this building." Hearing those words shifted something deep inside my chest. The narrative Sloane was peddling insisted my entire existence revolved around hoarding a child because I had nothing else. Reality proved I possessed a thriving career, a home, and a life entirely my own. Sitting in my car in the clinic parking lot, I drafted one final email. I copied Sloane, Marjorie, Naomi, and the wedding photographer. The message stated clearly that Lily would only participate as a junior bridesmaid. There would be no surprise reveal, no interviews, and absolutely no commercial content recorded. Furthermore, I retained the absolute right to remove Lily from the premises at my sole discretion. My phone buzzed 3 minutes later. Sloane replied with a sickly sweet message, accusing me of imagining drama and promising a beautiful, peaceful day. I saved the email to the encrypted folder without responding. A second notification chimed, this time a text from Marjorie. She demanded I stop sending aggressive emails to the production team. My mother insisted that I needed to cooperate because too many people were going to lose everything if the television deal fell apart. To prove her point about the high stakes, she carelessly forwarded a massive chain of emails between herself and Sloane's business manager. Scrolling through the long thread, I stopped breathing. My mother was not fighting to keep the family peace. She was fighting to protect an investment. Below my mother's message was a wire confirmation for $85,000. The morning of the wedding arrived with a heavy, oppressive stillness. Packing my leather tote bag required military precision. Slipping the thick blue folder containing the physical guardianship order into the main compartment, I added 2 heavy backup batteries and confirmed the digital copy was fully loaded on my phone. Down the hall, Lily stood perfectly still while I adjusted the straps of her pale pink junior bridesmaid dress. "Do you think Aunt Sloane will really have time to hang out with me today?" the little girl asked, her voice quiet and full of a fragile hope. Brushing a stray curl behind her ear, I chose my words carefully. I refused to completely crush her spirit, but I also needed to keep her grounded in reality. "Weddings are incredibly busy events, sweetie. Remember, you do not owe anyone a performance today." If things get too loud or feel wrong, what do we say? We forgot the library book, Lily recited immediately. Exactly. I squeezed her shoulder gently. We say that, and we leave. No arguments. Arriving at Willow Crest Vineyard an hour later, the sheer scale of the production immediately set my nerves on edge. Massive glass walls offered a stunning view of the autumn vines, but my focus remained strictly on the people walking the floor. Black lanyards bearing the True North Media logo hung around the necks of at least a dozen crew members, far more than a standard wedding documentary team. Finding the venue coordinator near the catering entrance, I quietly confirmed our prior arrangement. Dana, a seasoned professional who clearly preferred peaceful events over reality television chaos, nodded sharply. She assured me the security team had my photograph and understood I was the absolute only person authorized to remove Lily from the premises. Walking toward the bridal suite, a man holding a heavy shoulder camera stepped into my path. He gestured toward the dance floor, asking casually where I planned to stand during the bouquet toss so he could set his lighting marks. I told him I would not be participating in any staged events and kept walking. Inside the suite, the air smelled heavily of hairspray and expensive champagne. Marjorie was already adjusting Sloane's veil. A young production assistant knelt beside Lily, attempting to clip a small black microphone to the front of her silk sash. "Take that off her right now," I said, dropping my bag onto a nearby chair. The assistant froze, looking nervously toward the bride. Marjorie spun around, her face flushed with immediate irritation. My mother accused me of embarrassing the child over a simple microphone meant to record junior bridesmaid vows. Ignoring the scolding, I waited until the assistant unclipped the device and backed away. 20 minutes later, Lily tugged urgently on my sleeve. She pointed to a stiff new sash someone had swapped onto her dress while I was checking the schedule. Running my fingers along the inside seam, I felt a hard, rectangular lump. A secondary wireless transmitter had been sewn directly into the fabric. Pulling my phone out, I photographed the hidden device, making sure the timestamp was clearly visible on the screen, and saved it straight to my encrypted folder. Stepping out of the suite to find a quiet place to call Eva, I nearly ran right into the groom. Benjamin looked incredibly sharp in his tailored tuxedo, his hands shoved deep into his pockets as he took a nervous breath. He offered a warm, genuine smile. "Thank you for bringing your daughter today," Benjamin said. "I know this whole circus is a lot." My blood ran completely cold, but I forced my facial expression to remain neutral. "Benjamin, we need to clarify something about Lily. I am her guardian, but I am not." "Benjamin." Sloane materialized from the hallway, her voice high and breathless as she grabbed his arm tightly. "The photographer needs us for first-look portraits right now. We can catch up with Kara and explain all the complicated family history after the honeymoon." She dragged him away before I could finish the sentence. Watching his retreating back, the terrifying depth of my sister's deception finally clicked into place. Benjamin honestly believed Lily was my biological child. He was walking into a marriage completely blind, and I realized I had to tell him the truth before this production turned his life into a public spectacle. The ceremony moved with ruthless efficiency. Vows were exchanged under a floral archway before I ever found an opportunity to speak with Benjamin alone. Moving into the glass ballroom for the reception, Sloane kept her new husband anchored to her side, perfectly framed by the hovering camera crew. Near the back of the room, Naomi Parks stood with her phone pressed hard against her ear, looking incredibly stressed as she argued with her legal department. Scanning the perimeter, my eyes caught a glimpse of a rolling garment rack tucked behind a velvet curtain near the stage. A tiny white dress hung from the metal bar. A different production assistant stood next to it, holding a handheld microphone. Pulling my phone from my clutch, I quickly typed a message to Eva. "They are staging it right now." The music shifted to an upbeat pop song. Sloane took the stage, holding her massive floral arrangement. She did not turn around. Checking the camera positions out of the corner of her eye, she looked straight at me. Marjorie deliberately shifted her chair backward, physically blocking the nearest exit door. Benjamin stood near the stairs, looking down at his phone as a digital contract materialized in his inbox. Sloane threw the flowers hard. The thick stems slammed into my chest, accompanied by her cruel joke about my age and my supposedly tragic single life. I did not react the way the shot list required. Refusing to drop the bouquet or scream, I walked calmly across the floor and handed the crushed roses directly to a devastated Benjamin. Leaving him to process the fraudulent contract he had just read, I turned my back on the stage and headed straight for the dessert table to collect my niece. Naomi blocked my path, shoving a digital tablet toward my chest. The producer insisted she needed final confirmation on the release form before launching the surprise family reunion segment. Looking down at the glowing screen, my eyes immediately found the signature at the bottom of the page. It was absolutely my name, but my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I studied the digital ink. The upper loop of the letter K possessed a very distinct, jagged angle. The tail of the letter A stretched out uncharacteristically long, dipping below the signature line. I recognized those specific imperfections instantly. I had written those exact letters 3 weeks ago, pressing a blue pen onto the paper emergency authorization my mother had requested. "That is my signature," I told Naomi, speaking clearly over the thumping music. "But I did not sign this release." The producer blinked, her professional mask slipping. "What do you mean? We have the file." "I mean, you need to stop filming immediately, preserve your original digital files, and call your production legal team." I stepped around her rigid form, never taking my eyes off the little girl waiting by the cake. The loop in the K was mine. The document beneath it was not. I stood my ground, my voice cutting through the thumping bass of the reception music like a razor. "This is not my consent," I repeated, my tone firm enough to force Naomi to take a half step back. "I sent formal, written notice of no consent to your entire team. You do not have permission to film Lily, and you certainly do not have permission to broadcast a release I never signed." I did not wait for her to argue. Tapping the screen of my phone, I opened my sent email folder, hit the share button, and forwarded the time-stamped refusal notice directly to the contact address for the production legal department. I copied my attorney, Eva, on the message, ensuring the digital paper trail was undeniable. "The recording stops now," I said, looking Naomi directly in the eyes. "If you continue to film her, I will hold True North Media personally liable for any breach of privacy regarding a minor." Naomi looked at the tablet in her hands, her face losing all its polished confidence. She signaled frantically to the camera operators, cutting the feed with a sharp, downward chopping motion of her hand. I walked past her, my eyes never leaving Lily. Standing next to the dessert table, the 9-year-old looked small and frightened, her hands trembling as she held the microphone she had been forced to wear. "We forgot the library book," I said, using the exact phrase we had practiced so many times. Lily did not ask why. She did not argue or look for Sloane's approval. She simply reached out, took my hand, and let me guide her away from the lights. Reaching into the silk sash, I pulled out the secondary wireless transmitter, placing the small piece of equipment into Naomi's hand as I walked past her. I did not say a word, letting the weight of the device symbolize the end of their staged surprise. My mother stood directly in my path at the ballroom exit, her face tight with a desperate, frantic anger. "Kara, you are ruining this entire day," Marjorie whispered, her voice hissed through gritted teeth. "You are making a scene over nothing. Sloane has worked so hard for this." I stopped inches from her, my voice dropping to a low, cold tone that stopped her in her tracks. "Which signature did you send her, Mom?" Marjorie froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out, the color draining from her cheeks as she realized the depth of what I already knew. I did not wait for an excuse. I simply looked at Dana, the venue coordinator, who immediately stepped forward to hold the heavy glass door open for us. Benjamin stood near the stage, his phone held up like a shield. Sloane had rushed to his side, but he was pointing toward the digital contract displayed on his screen. I heard him demand to know why the contract listed Lily as Sloane's daughter, and why his own name had been added as a future father figure without his knowledge. Sloane's frantic denials were barely audible over the growing murmurs of the confused guests. Sloane grabbed for the microphone on the stage, her composure finally shattering as the cameras remained pointed at the floor. "Kara is kidnapping my daughter!" she screamed, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. "Security, stop her!" Dana stepped firmly between Sloane and the door, her professional posture leaving no room for argument. "This is a private matter, and I will not allow you to disturb the guests further," the coordinator said, her voice cool and authoritative. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, opening the digital file of the permanent guardianship order. I showed the screen to the security guard standing by the door. The man glanced at the official seal, nodded once, and stepped aside to let us pass. We walked into the cool autumn air, the silence of the parking lot feeling like a physical relief. We were already inside my car and pulling away from the vineyard before Sloane could even make it to the parking lot. My phone rang continuously as we merged onto the main road. I ignored the incoming calls, focusing entirely on the road ahead until my phone finally pinged with a notification from Eva. The attorney confirmed that Production Legal had officially locked all the files from the wedding, effectively killing the broadcast segment before it could be edited. "They are going to try to paint you as the villain, Kara," Eva said, her voice steady and professional over the speakerphone. "But the venue incident reports are already being drafted. Dana is on our side." I glanced at the screen of the tablet I had brought with me, reflecting on the chain of custody. The venue had never received a signed emergency authorization from me. The only person who had ever held that document was my mother. The realization sat heavy in my chest, a dark final confirmation of exactly who had paved the way for my sister's deceit. The lie had not just been Sloane's. It had been a family project, and for the first time in my life, I was done protecting the people who had spent decades tearing me down. "Let them try," I said, feeling a strange, quiet sense of power settle over me. The truth is the only thing that matters now. The house felt cavernous when we finally returned, the silence magnifying every sound. I helped Lily change out of her dress, her movements sluggish and heavy. She did not ask about the library book, and she did not mention Sloane. She simply crawled into bed, curled into a tight ball, and stared at the wall until sleep finally pulled her under. Sitting in the kitchen, I kept my hands busy with mindless tasks to keep the crushing weight of the day from paralyzing me. My phone rested on the counter, vibrating incessantly until I finally silenced it. Sloane had launched an immediate digital offensive, posting a tearful video that cropped out the camera crew and the microphone, showing only the moment I took Lily's hand to leave. The comment sections turned vicious within an hour, with strangers calling me a bitter, controlling woman who resented her own sister's happiness. Riverbend Children's Therapy Center received its first round of complaints before I even finished clearing the breakfast dishes the next morning. My supervisor called me into her office, her expression guarded but professional. I showed her the time-stamped emails, the guardianship order, and the photograph of the transmitter sewn into the dress. She listened in silence, nodding as the pieces of the staged production came together. She allowed me to remain on the schedule, but the tension in the building felt suffocating. I refused to engage in the public spectacle. Every instinct begged me to defend myself, to blast the truth across every platform, but I stayed silent. Winning this war required playing by the rules of evidence and preservation, not the rules of influencer drama. I turned my phone off during the day, focusing entirely on my patients, proving to myself that my professional worth remained untouched by Sloane's desperate attempts to rewrite history. Eva worked through the night, formalizing the preservation requests. By Monday morning, the true sequence of events began to surface through official channels. Naomi Park, the producer, had finally secured a meeting with her legal department. They confirmed that the release form had been digitally submitted through Sloane's personal account, and that the initial metadata analysis indicated the signature was a separate image object, not a handwritten entry. Eva carefully matched the signature's unique jagged loop and the distinctive tail on the letter A to the emergency medical form my mother had insisted on carrying. We still lacked a definitive forensic report, but the trail was becoming impossible for my family to hide. Benjamin sent an email late that evening, attaching the digital contract that had been sent to his phone during the reception. He included a brief, cold note confirming that he had never spoken to anyone about adding Lily to the legal documents and that he had officially initiated separation proceedings. He was not looking for a savior or a partner in revenge. He was simply a man who had discovered he was married to a stranger, and he wanted out. The walls between Sloane and Marjorie began to crumble as the consequences intensified. I received a frantic message from my mother, begging me to destroy the original medical form before it could be used in court. She claimed she had only given Sloan the document because my sister promised it was for a draft, not for an actual legal release. Sloan's counter-argument arrived in my inbox shortly after, an email filled with insults, claiming Marjorie had known exactly how the signature would be used. They were tearing each other apart in writing, inadvertently providing the final pieces of the puzzle I needed. Lily came home from school on Thursday, her face pale. A classmate had shown her the edited video Sloan posted, claiming I was keeping her away from her real mother. I sat with her on the porch, holding her hands, listening as she poured out her confusion. "Does loving her mean I'm betraying you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I wiped a tear from her cheek, my own heart aching with a fierce, protective love. Loving anyone is never a betrayal, Lily. You are allowed to love whoever you want. But you are not responsible for the things adults do, and you are not responsible for fixing their mistakes. The final confirmation of the trap arrived in a package from the production legal team. It contained the shot list for the entire wedding day. I spread the papers across the dining room table, feeling my skin go cold. The production had mapped out every single emotion they expected from the guests, and every manufactured conflict they intended to capture. My eyes scanned the lines of text until I found the specific moment the flowers hit my chest. The line was only 3 words long. Bouquet, humiliation. Guardian reaction. The staged insult, the cameras, the deliberate plan to destroy my public reputation, it had all been reduced to a simple, calculated instruction on a list. They had not just wanted a wedding video. They had wanted a story where I played the villain. The family court hearing room smelled of floor wax and stale tension. I sat at the mahogany table, my hands clasped tightly together to hide the tremor that had refused to fade for weeks. Eva sat beside me, her expression a mask of calm, clinical precision. Across the aisle, Sloan looked like a shadow of herself, her designer dress hanging loosely on her frame, while my mother, Marjorie, sat hunched in the corner, staring at the floor as if she could simply dissolve into the carpeting. Eva did not need a dramatic opening statement. She simply laid out the facts like pieces of a puzzle. She established my role as the court-appointed permanent guardian and introduced the mountain of evidence documenting my repeated, clear refusals to authorize commercial filming. Each email, each time-stamped notification, and each written warning regarding Lily's privacy was presented as a testament to my commitment to her well-being. The judge listened intently as Ava read the transcripts of the messages my sister had sent to the young child, manipulating her into keeping secrets under the guise of family surprises. When we introduced the timeline of the visitation, the reality of the situation became impossible to ignore. Every time Sloan claimed I had prevented a reunion, the timeline showed a record of her own cancellations, followed immediately by my documented offers for alternative dates. The court did not need to hear my opinion. The cold, hard data did the work for me. The atmosphere grew suffocating when the production legal team turned over their files under subpoena. We presented the digital forensics report, which definitively proved that the signature on the release form was a pasted image object, not a handwritten document created by me. When the judge questioned Marjorie about her role, my mother attempted to play the victim, claiming she believed she was simply helping her children resolve a minor misunderstanding. Eva then presented the email string, where Marjorie had explicitly instructed Sloan to use that specific medical form, noting that I signed everything the same way. Marjorie's face crumbled, her hands trembling as she held a handkerchief, but the judge remained unmoved by the display. "The court will issue a temporary order," the judge declared, his voice echoing through the silent chamber. "The respondent is prohibited from using the child's name or likeness for any commercial purpose. Visitation is hereby restricted to supervised settings, and all communication must occur through a court-monitored application." I let out a breath I felt I had been holding since the wedding. It was not a total victory, nor did it erase the betrayal, but it gave Lily the protection she deserved. Benjamin stood to testify shortly after, his posture rigid and his eyes filled with a weary, quiet anger. He presented the unsigned contract that had been sent to his phone during the reception, confirming that he had been entirely unaware of the true nature of his wife's relationship with the child. His presence in the room destroyed any remaining facade that this had been a simple, well-intentioned family reunion. He was a man, collateral to my sister's ambition, and his testimony rendered her previous claims of maternal devotion hollow. The financial collapse of my sister's company happened within days of the ruling. The network officially terminated the docuseries, citing the fraudulent documents and the breach of consent as non-negotiable grounds for immediate cancellation. Sponsors demanded their investments back, and my mother found herself facing the loss of her retirement savings as the company was dismantled to satisfy debts. Several weeks later, a car pulled into my driveway. Sloane and Marjorie emerged, walking toward my front door with a desperate, frantic energy. I let them into the living room, but I ensured Lily was safely occupied in another part of the house with a friend. They placed a thick document on the table, their hands moving with the same synchronized desperation they had used to orchestrate the wedding trap. It was a settlement agreement, requesting that I sign a statement declaring the entire incident a simple, regrettable family misunderstanding. "If you just sign this, Kara, it saves all of us," Sloane whispered, her eyes red and puffy as she tried to summon one last performance of maternal sorrow. "It saves Mom's reputation and fixes the legal mess." Marjorie leaned in, her voice low and pleading. "Please, Kara. I am losing everything I worked for my whole life." I looked at the document, then back at the two women who had spent my entire adult life treating me like a resource they could harvest whenever their own plans failed. They had lost the television show, the marriage, and the money, and they still thought I would save them. I realized, with a clarity that finally brought me peace, that they had learned absolutely nothing. They were not sorry for the deception. They were only sorry that it had failed. The settlement agreement sat between us, a stark white document that promised everything would vanish if I just applied my signature. Sloane gripped her handbag, knuckles turning ivory, while Marjorie sat rigid, her eyes fixed on the coffee table as if she could force me to move my hand by sheer willpower alone. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and returned with a single black pen, but I did not offer it to them. Instead, I set it down on the sideboard, far from the table. "I spent 9 years protecting Lily from your choices," I said, my voice steady, stripped of the guilt they had used to anchor me for so long. "I am not protecting you from them now." Sloane let out a shaky breath, her composure cracking. "You are just being vindictive. You want to see us burn for a simple mistake." "This was not a mistake, Sloane," I replied, feeling no urge to scream or argue. "This was a plan. You chose to manufacture a tragedy, and you chose to include a child in your production. You have to live with the fallout." Marjorie tried to stand, her hands reaching out as if to physically steer me toward the pen. "Kara, please. I am your mother. After everything I have done for this family, you could at least give us this." I watched her for a long moment, seeing the woman who had taught me that my value lay entirely in how much of myself I could sacrifice to keep the peace. "You did not lose me because of one mistake," I said quietly. "You lost me after hundreds of choices you kept giving the same name. I am not the person who fixes your life anymore." Sloane lunged for the pen on the sideboard, but I moved faster, sliding the settlement agreement off the table and into the recycling bin. The sound of paper hitting the bottom of the bin sounded like a gavel strike. My sister stood frozen, the reality finally setting in that no amount of tears or accusations would ever compel me to lie for her again. They left the house minutes later, Marjorie silent, and Sloane stumbling as if she had forgotten how to walk on her own. "I am sorry," Sloane muttered, her eyes darting toward the front door, looking for a way to save face. "I will post an apology video, Kara. I will include her in it. I will correct the narrative." "An apology does not need a child's face to have value," I told her, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. "If you ever want to write a letter, you send it through the therapist. If it is appropriate, she will see it. But you do not use her for content, and you do not use her for your image." Sloane did not argue. She knew the court order stood like a fortress, and she knew I had enough evidence to ensure that any violation would be the last. 6 months drifted by, slow and steady, marking a season of genuine repair. The court maintained the supervised visitation schedule, and while Sloane showed up for a few sessions, she eventually missed a critical meeting after a vacation she deemed more important. Every time she chose her own convenience over her daughter's presence, I sat with Lily, validating the hurt without filling the void with my own anger. I never stopped her from loving her mother, but I stopped acting as the bridge that allowed Sloane to cross back into our lives whenever it served her interest. In April, My appointment as the clinical program director became official. My office looked out over the courtyard of the therapy center, where I could see children playing safely on the sensory playground. I had built a new life, brick by brick, entirely independent of my family's crumbling empire. Marjorie still called occasionally, but I kept the conversations short and focused strictly on logistics, never inviting her into the spaces where she could exert influence or sow confusion. The final piece of the house felt complete on a warm Tuesday evening. The spare key Marjorie had finally returned lay on the sideboard, a small, jagged piece of metal that no longer held any power over me. I picked it up, opened the junk drawer in the kitchen, and tossed it into the back corner, burying it beneath old manuals and spare batteries. I walked to the front door, turned the deadbolt, and listened to the click of the lock. It was a sound of finality. I moved to the back of the townhouse, opening the sliding door that led to the small garden. Lily waited by the raised bed we had constructed earlier that spring, her hands covered in dirt as she inspected the first green shoots of our tomato plants. The evening light turned the sky into a soft bruised purple, and the air smelled like wet earth and new beginnings. I stood in the doorway for a moment, simply watching. I realized then that closing the front door had not been a defensive act of imprisonment. It had been the only way to open the back garden, creating a space where the only people allowed inside were those who had earned a place at the table, those who treated Lily with the respect she was always owed. For the first time, the life behind that door belonged only to the people who had earned a place inside it. When you look back at the jagged journey Kara walked to protect her niece, the truth of this story lands right in your own life with undeniable clarity. The most painful lesson you have to gather from these chapters is that biological blood does not give anyone an automatic license to mistreat you, exploit your children, or overwrite your sacrifices. For far too long, you might have been taught that family peace requires absolute silence, that you must constantly absorb the bad choices of the people around you just to keep a fragile illusion alive at the dinner table. But true love does not ask you to destroy your own mental health or hand over your children to a predatory camera lens just to save someone else's brand or retirement fund. This story teaches you that a boundary is not an act of malice. It is the ultimate act of self-respect and the highest form of protection you can offer to the innocent lives, counting on you to be their shield. You do not owe a relationship to adults who view your boundaries as an act of war. And you certainly do not owe an apology to people who are only sorry because they finally got caught in their own trap. Setting boundaries will always feel incredibly uncomfortable at first, especially if you have spent decades being the designated fixer, the reliable one who always stays quiet so the louder voices can shine. The people who are used to harvesting your energy will call you selfish, bitter, and cold the moment you finally say no. They will edit the videos of your life to make you look like the villain, and they will try to use your private choices as public ammunition against you. But you have to remember that their anger is simply proof that your wall is working, that you have finally stripped away their unauthorized access to your peace. The closure you need will never come from a frantic public confrontation or a dramatic confession where the villain suddenly realizes the error of their ways. Real closure comes quietly, in the steady rhythm of a household that no longer shakes when the phone rings, in the secure bank accounts you built with your own hard work, and in the deep, untroubled sleep of a child who finally knows she is safe. True revenge is not a clever trap designed to humiliate your enemies. It is simply the absolute refusal to rescue your abusers from the natural consequences of their own toxic decisions. You win the moment you step off their stage, drop their script into the trash, and choose to invest your precious time into building a quiet, thriving life that they can no longer reach or ruin. As you sit with these thoughts and look at the boundaries you are currently trying to maintain in your own life, it is worth asking yourself where your own limit lies. How many times have you allowed someone to copy your signature, cross your lines, or take credit for your sacrifices just to avoid a difficult conversation at the family gathering? Have you been keeping secrets for adults who make you feel afraid to ask simple questions? Or have you finally found the courage to claim your own key and lock the door against the chaos? If you have ever been forced to choose between keeping the family peace and keeping your own sanity, please share your story in the comments below, because your strength might be the exact blueprint another woman needs to finally walk out the door and open her own garden.